Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Northshire Live virtual event. I'm Dafydd. I'm the events manager at Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location, and I'm here as always with my good friend Rachel Person, my colleague from Northshire's Saratoga Springs store. And we have a very special event for you tonight. But before we get started, just a few quick things. We are recording tonight's event for later broadcast on our YouTube channel. But have no fear, only those of us appearing in the little unmuted in the little yellow box will be appearing on YouTube. And you can have access to it later. Likewise, for that matter, please type any questions you have in the chat box. Rachel and I will save them up for the Q&A at the end of the night's evening and pose them at that time. And finally, just a note of thanks. We really appreciate all of the support we've had. It's been a hard year for independent bookstores and independent businesses of all kinds, and Northshire wouldn't be here without you. So we really appreciate your support. And Rachel, take things away, please.
It is my great honor tonight to get to welcome Mary Gauthier, a musician I've very long admired, to Northshire Live. The Associated Press named her one of the best songwriters of her generation, and her album Rifles and Rosary Beads was nominated for a Grammy Award for Best Folk Album and Record of the Year by the Americana Music Association. Her songs have been recorded by dozens of artists, and she's with us tonight to talk about her first book, Saved by a Song. And she'll be interviewed tonight by Sarah Craig, the executive director of Caffe Lena, which is widely recognized as the longest continuously operating folk venue in the United States, and which plays an absolutely vital role in the cultural life of Saratoga Springs. Before joining the Caffe, she was executive director for the Massachusetts State Branch of Peace Action, a nationwide grassroots citizens lobby. Please join me in welcoming them both to Northshire Live.
Thank you for having us here, Rachel. And Dafydd, it's wonderful. Northshire, Saratoga, and Northshire and Manchester are also just cultural treasures for us. Independent bookstores are to be supported, and we all feel grateful you're in town. So, Mary, I'm gonna jump in here and tell you, first of all, I love the book, and I probably shouldn't give that away to everybody right off the bat, but I can't resist. So, I have this vision of you being on an airplane heading to a gig somewhere, and the guy next to you asks you what you do for a living, and you say that you stand on stages all over the world and you play songs that you wrote, and he says, "Oh, you're an entertainer." And, a lot of people, if they heard that job description, might say, "Oh, she's an entertainer." But you get up there in front of a bunch of people who bought tickets to hear you sing. And I don't think that that's exactly what's going through your head. When you step on stage, what are you there to do?
Well, entertainment's part of it, but I describe what I do kind of as a ministry of sorts. What I think my mission statement is to emotionally connect with every person in the room and help them to connect with themselves. I tend to be the kind of artist that brings people to places inside of themselves that they weren't expecting to go to. What my hope is, and I think this is true, is that this is a positive thing that brings connection and meaning and substance. Entertainment, the two polar extremes, one is commercialism and escapism, which is kind of a drug thing that runs away from the struggles and difficulties of life and just puts you in a great zone and you check out. And that is useful and will always be big business. I tend to go to the other extreme and guide people into checking in and running towards the struggle. And we all find each other there. And in that mutuality, we find empathy. And I just think that that's one of the great things that music and song can do, is build empathy bridges that connect people who may not think on the surface they have anything in common.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think that those are the kinds of songs that really take off in a place where people are really listening to music, where they're there, they're sitting there, and they're listening to the words that come out of your mouth. It's not something that happens in the background. And it's also another interesting thing about your songs is that they're not the kind of songs that you're going to sing when you're marching down the street with a group of people, having a parade for peace and justice. But more than almost anyone I know, or as much as anyone I know, from the legends like Pete Seeger to the current troubadours like Joe Jenks, I think that you are out to save the world with songs. And when you first started performing your songs in public, did you know that that's what you were doing? Was that your motivation, or did that come on as time went by and you realized the effect you were having?
I think that became more and more clear. I think in the beginning, I was trying to save myself. I was drowning in addiction and trauma, dysfunction, so many problems. I wrote my first song after I got sober, and I just hung my sobriety and recovery on writing songs and using music and song to articulate the swirling mess inside of me and try to make sense of what was so extremely confusing to me. How did I end up in such a state? I didn't know. I didn't know how I ended up so messed up. And so I use music and songs to sort myself out as almost a therapeutic Hail Mary, like a prayer. And it worked. And I got better. And I found deeper and deeper stability and recovery. And then my connection to music and song became the foundation of my life, almost a religion of sorts, although there's no theology. It became integrated with who I see myself as. I am a songwriter. It's fundamental to my identity. And then, 20 years in, I got asked to work with wounded veterans who were dealing with a lot of the same stuff I dealt with in my early recovery and in my early years as a songwriter. And I was asked to use music and song to help them articulate their struggle. And I knew from personal experience that it works. And so this is transformative in many, many ways. And it transforms an individual by allowing a person to be seen and heard and to become their own witness. You take a step back from a song you wrote and witness yourself, which is huge. It takes the mess out of your head, puts it into a song, you stand back and you look at it. Flannery O'Connor wrote that I write so I can read it so I can know what I think. That's kind of my situation. I write songs so I can hear them, so I can know what I feel. And writing with other people who are using the art form to help them deal with particularly trauma and addiction, it has been the second part of my career. And yeah, it does change the world. It changes the world by helping the individual.
You had this wonderful sentence that I pulled out of your book where you say, my songs helped me become real to myself, be witnessed, and then become a witness. They saved me. And one of your transformational moments came when you were arrested for driving under the influence. and you had this sort of out of body experience almost where you saw yourself from the outside. Can you talk a little bit about that moment and help us understand what it means to become real to yourself and how that transformed into the urge to write songs?
What a great question. Yeah, I was arrested for drunk driving opening night of my second restaurant. That was July 12th, 1990. And in the holding cell, I for a millisecond, saw myself. I left my body, looked down, and saw the reality of my situation, which was I needed help. I was in trouble. And that changed everything for me. It put me on a completely different life trajectory. I was willing to ask for help. I was willing to receive help. Pointed me down a completely new path. And I got sober and I stayed sober. This July 13th, I celebrated 31 years of recovery. And music and song has been the taproot, I think. In recovery, you got to find something to believe in. Some people call it a higher power or God. I believe in art. I believe in literature. I believe in creativity. I believe in poetry. I believe in the power of connection through the arts and how it can stabilize and, in some ways, take pain and transmute it into something that's not painful anymore. There's a paradox, right? When you sing the blues, you feel better somehow. I'm of that belief system that singing my way through the hard stuff makes it not as hard. And I don't only write about hard stuff, but I spent a lot of years writing about hard stuff because I had a lot of hard stuff. Today, I am inclined to write love songs and other type of songs that I wasn't writing when I was young. I'm amazed that I'm still alive. I kind of write songs about being amazed that I'm still alive. But writing about the hard stuff and singing that and having people nod and say, yeah, me too, Mary, thank you for saying that. That's a kind of salvation for the songwriter, as well as the listener. There's a Me Too moment in some of these songs that brings hope, that you don't feel alone. When you're not alone, you have hope. Not being alone is a big deal. I learned that so much working with our veterans.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about, kind of what you think gives songs such tremendous value. And, we're living in this world where like rock star is sort of the ultimate appellation for somebody like you might say, oh, that she's just a rock star at whatever she does. And, you're telling people to write songs to achieve wisdom, self-knowledge, inner strength. You're not telling them to write songs to achieve fame and fortune. And I'm wondering if maybe one of your reasons for writing this book is to show songwriters how to become better songwriters.
Absolutely. I look at it as a mashup of a book. It's got memoir, but the memoir is connected to song and songwriting. I only go into the story as it's relevant to each song that a chapter addresses. And I want to work with and I do work with lots and lots of songwriters and creative writers and poets. And I even work with ministers and preachers to help them to go into vulnerability and show things that they want to hide. It's through these revelations that we find each other. I always say that if you write about what's personal, it's boring. If you write about what's deeply personal, it gets interesting. Because this is universal. The deeply personal is universal. I've learned this over and over again.
I think Robert Frost talks about that, and that is a really dangerous limb for me to go out on because I'm not a literature person. And I'm talking to a bookstore crowd right now, but I remember some kind of quote about, from anything you can find that thread that ties it to the universe.
Yes.
And I've always loved that idea.
Yes, I agree with that. And I find that when you go down into what we protect, because we don't want people to know that about us, because we fear it will lead us to be rejected. If we go down in and reveal some of that stuff in our art, we get to know ourselves better, and our listeners get to know themselves better. And that is really what I guide my songwriting. That's an interesting song, too. There's commercial pop music that is about joy, escapism, sex, love. Those songs are fantastic and we need them. But there's also the thread that connects all the folk singers through time, which is reporting back from the fire of the time that we live in. And to capture the moments of our life that deeply impact us, not just the lustful moments or the moments of deep romantic love, which is basically what pop music's about, but all of the moments, and particularly, I think, in folk music, the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, the common everyday person's struggle.
Absolutely.
We might read about it in the newspaper or see it on the news day in and day out, but then when we hear it sung, it touches our whole mind and our whole heart, and it brings it alive for us in a different way. Touring musicians have this kind of overworked joke that the job of touring is loading and unloading your van and driving the vehicle from gig to gig. Performing the show is not the work. And as I read your book, I'm feeling like the really big challenge, the real work of being a troubadour is figuring yourself out. And you have this wonderful line of advice that goes, find your own voice that makes you weep.
Yes.
And I love find your own voice that makes you weep. Do you think that everyone has that well of tears inside?
How could you not? We're mortal. Everything you love is going to die, including you. Grief is impossible to avoid. It's why we have poems and paintings and songs. It's love and death. What else is there? Beauty, love, death. And so, yes, we all experience awe at life and sorrow at death. And all of these experiences are articulated in great art. And yeah, I agree with you. The work of the troubadour is not touring. The work of troubadour is to get into a state of mind where your songs become true. Yeah. The root of troubadour for me is the word true.
I love that. I had an interesting thought, interesting to me anyway, and maybe it will be interesting to you while I was reading your book. Your book speaks to people who feel alone with their trauma, who feel like outsiders, and you say that outsider feeling is universal. The outsider feeling is universal. And that gave me pause because we're living in this moment right now where a large group of people in America who have long felt unseen, unheard, disrespected are making themselves heard in no uncertain terms. And I am thinking of the movement that was started by our former president. And I am not trying to get into a political discussion here. That's not really my point. But what I'm talking about is that outsider feeling and different ways that that can play out. And in your work, you are touching and validating that outsider feeling, but you do it for good and for healing and not for harm. Can you talk about that, the different ways to touch that and harness that?
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think most everybody at some point feels like an outsider. And I think that the job that I do is to gather people who feel that way and connect them, which is most everybody. In fact, I think that life is so unbelievably complicated, and love is so unexpectedly difficult, and disappointment is inevitable, and there's a process to living through life that is struggle. No matter how much money you have or how many accolades, we watch people destroy themselves at the top of their game.
Yeah.
Anthony Bourdain. So what I try to do is write the truth and tell on it. I want to tell on it. I don't want those monsters to have control and be secrets. I want to tell on it. And when I tell on it, I become someone with agency over it. It doesn't own me. Yes, the misfit outsider feeling can be easily manipulated by authoritarian, a fascist, hate mongering, and we can easily blame people for how we feel. I certainly have been guilty of that, blaming my dad for my addiction. It wasn't his fault. He was an alcoholic, and I found peace with him and described that in detail in the book. It's not my father's fault. It's not my family's fault. I had a path to walk. I think the taking that feeling and then blaming it on groups of people is far too simple of a. I think it's way more complicated. It's not. There are layers and layers and layers to this conversation, but I think we can find each other in that feeling and use it to connect instead of hate. That's my hope, and that's why I wrote the book in many ways.
Yeah. I hope everybody listening is signed up to get their copy, because I just think that you do a great job with that, and it's such a timely subject. So Dave Van Ronk, in his memoir, The Mayor of McDougal Street, for anybody who's not kind of a music person, Dave Van Ronk's a hugely influential Greenwich Village folk and blues singer. He was a mentor to Bob Dylan and countless other singer-songwriters. There was this wonderful passage that really stuck with me, where he described himself as a very young man, just kind of getting good at guitar, and he would lean back in bed against his pillow, and he had a chord chart up on the wall, and he would just go, let his eyes go from one chord to another, and he would just try and get that fluidity of being able to change from any chord to any other chord. You spend very little time in your book talking about the music part of what you do. You are a songwriter and not just a poet. Can you talk about the role of melody in your art?
Yeah, I am not a trained musician, so my work with music is instinctual. And it is intuitive, and I'm not the right person to articulate that. There's so many good books about music theory, melody writing, chord progressions, The classical way of talking about music is not in my. I don't have the language, so I didn't try to do it because I don't know how to do it. I do know that inside a handful of chords lives every emotion that a human being can experience, and so I find the feelings inside those chords. I'm using, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then the minors, and the flats every now and then, and that's about it. I'm not a complex composer. And I come from a long tradition of that. Johnny Cash, Hank Williams, Woody Guthrie, they're not playing, Woody said anything above the third fret, you're just showing off. I feel that you can fully articulate emotion with simplicity. And fortunately for me, simplicity is my gift. The simpler it gets, as if it is very true, the harder it is. It simple and easy are very easy to confuse, but simple and easy are not synonyms. Johnny Cash, when asked about his advice to songwriters, was to write simple. It's the hardest way to write. So I don't stare at chord charts in my bed. Although I did spend my 41st birthday with Dave Van Ronk at Club Passim, and that was cool. And I'll always have that memory. I find melody inside the basic chords, and I try to make it sound like the feelings the song is articulating. So I marry my simple melody to the emotion of the song and pair them, and it works fine for me. And I can't articulate that by saying you take this chord and match it to this note, and then you put the, I don't even know how to say it, the root of the chord and I don't know any of that stuff. I just feel my way through it in the dark, and I have enough knowledge instinctively to get me through a song and to keep getting me through songs. So my approach is sort of like songwriting for dummies in that way. All of rock and roll is built on a 1-4-5, which is the first, the fourth, and the fifth note of a chord. So the 1 is a G, the 4 is C, D, G, C, D, E, B, A. Those three chords. It's all those three chords over and over again in rock and roll. It's not because I started later in life. It's not possible for me to master my instrument. I hire really great musicians who have mastered theirs. My mastery that I focus on is on the words and getting the story told in a way that connects universally with people across the divide, across the things that we think separate us: age, race, sexual preference, gender, political beliefs. I play to a pretty diverse audience. It's way more diverse than I ever dreamed possible.
Yeah, and as far as your melodies go, they're perfect. And
thank you.
Throughout reading this book, of course, I went back and listened to a lot of your music, and I do this thing where we all do this. You get a melody stuck in your head sometimes, and you can't remember what the song is or where that came from, and you're just humming it and humming it. If you can figure out what that song is, this is just a piece of advice for everybody listening, go back and look at the words for it, because even though you may not have the words at the front of your brain, the melody is telling you to listen to those words. And if you go find them, there's a message for you there.
Yeah.
If I haven't done this, but I know that this is true. If I were to stand on a street corner with a pad of paper and a pencil, and I asked people walking by to draw a picture that represents a folk music coffee house, a place where troubadours come and play songs, every single person is going to draw a picture of a coffee cup with like a cloud of musical notes coming out of it, like steam. Very few folk musicians read music. And I have had classical music lovers come to the Caffe to see their very first folk show. And they say when they leave, they're like, she played the entire 2 hours with no sheet music. How does she even do that? And, I'm not asking you to suggest a logo, but do you have, what would be the symbol, do you think, of songs as you understand them?
A bridge.
I like that.
I think a great song shows your insides on the outside so that listeners can see their insides and it connects us.
I love that. And maybe a bridge that kind of looks like hands.
Yeah. A bridge built of hands that are holding on to each other.
You described this, something I'd never heard of before, this amazing Nashville tradition where an established artist gives their guitar to a newcomer, and that happened to you. What qualities would a newcomer have to make you want to give them your guitar?
Good question. Well, I treasure vulnerability and authenticity. I love a great lyricist, someone who is taking risks and saying things that are often not spoken, and singing truths that capture the zeitgeist of our time, and singing it first person, even if it's not about them. Singing us who we are. That's what I'm looking for. You sing me who I am, and you got me.
Yeah, it's the things you already know that you hear coming out of somebody else's mouth that just tear you open.
Or the things that you kind of knew, but you needed someone to screw the light bulb in all the way, and they give you the language for what you didn't articulate yet. Yeah. And they pulled it from a millisecond from your future. Yeah. That's sacred stuff. And the great ones all do that.
Yeah. That's when all of a sudden you're crying and you didn't see it coming.
It was inside you. Yeah.
Everything in your book is incredibly vulnerable and trusting. You let us very deep into your private life in this book. But to me, one of the bravest things that you did was to show us early versions of your songs, lyrics that you discarded, that you rewrote, that you improved. Can you talk about that decision to include the rough drafts of some of your most famous songs?
Yeah, I am friends with Joe Klein. Joe Klein wrote a famous book called Primary Colors. He also wrote Woody Guthrie, A Life, which for many years was the definitive biography of Woody Guthrie. And Joe said, as he was going through his research and looking through Woody's papers and getting the information he needed to write Woody Guthrie, A Life, the most interesting thing he came across was early drafts of This Land Is Your Land. And the words that Woody scratched out and added gave us an inside look at how his mind worked and how his process worked. And I gave Joe a couple of chapters of my book and said, please, be honest, am I getting anywhere? He said, I got good news and I got bad news. Good news, you can write. Bad news, you got to go deeper. And I want you to show us your process. And so fortunately, I've saved all my papers and printed out my drafts and drafts and drafts. And so I was able to go in and show in the book, Anne Lamott would call it shitty first drafts. In the book she wrote, the wonderful, I think, classic book, Bird by Bird. And songs have shitty first drafts. And second drafts and third drafts and fourth drafts. It comes alive one word at a time for me. And I go deeper and deeper to the truth by getting rid of the lies. And this is all not defined as courtroom truth, but emotional truth. So I get rid of hiding and posturing and all of the protective stances that a normal person takes to protect themselves, and start revealing and revealing, and it becomes much more interesting and a far better song. Mm-hmm. And so truth in literature, truth in songwriting is not cash register honesty or courtroom truth. It is emotional truth that I'm referencing.
You do a lot of co-writes. Crit Harming got mentioned quite a few times in the book. Why and when do you bring in a writing partner?
In the beginning, Crit helped me make my songs better. He was my first record producer. He made my first 2 records, and he really helped me make my songs better. I was on the path, but I needed some hand-holding. And he was a fantastic co-writer and a producer. I co-write a lot. For me, it's social hour. It's a great way of hanging out. I write on Zoom with co-writers. I find that I enjoy sharing the heavy lifting with someone. There's some songs I just feel I need to write on my own. And so many songs I just love writing with other people. I've been writing with Hank Williams' grandson, Sam Williams, and he just got a record deal on Universal. And he wants to go the route of his grandfather in a way. He's not going to do what the record company tells him to do. He's singing his family truth. And look, he's Hank Williams Jr.'s son. There's stuff in that family, oh my God. And he wants to tell it. And his manager thinks I'm the person to help him, and I love working with him. He's an incredibly gifted singer, and he wants to sing universal truths. He's a very young fella. I think he's 19, but he's very, very good, and he looks just like his grandfather. In that situation, I would write with him anytime, anywhere. There's folks that help me articulate my truths and get to the songs that I'm struggling with. Ben Glover, Gretchen Peters, Beth Nielsen Chapman is a great co-writer with me, for me. I work quite a bit with Amy Helm, Levon's daughter. She comes to me to help her articulate some of her family's story. I just love co-writing. I do, in all honesty, feel like sometimes I'm lazy. And I just don't feel like doing the heavy lifting by myself, so I'll bring in a co-writer because it's hard. And I'm old, and I'm tired, and it's just better to have some help around here. But there's songs also that I really, really know that I have to write them alone, like Mercy Now. Yeah. There's songs that are mine to write and mine alone.
Well, I know we're getting some questions in here, and we want to give the folks some time. But before I give up the mic here, I want to give you a chance to address this question because I feel like it's really at the heart of the whole book. And that is, can you talk for a moment about the relationship between honesty and hope?
Oh, yeah, that's a really, really hard question. Wow. When, as a songwriter, people accuse me of writing songs that are sad and too sad sometimes, my response is always, but there's hope. A person without hope wouldn't have written this song. The hope is invested in the effort it takes to have written it and to sing it to you. The hope is that there'll be some transformation here. You don't sing the blues to deepen your blues. You sing the blues to transform the feeling of sorrow into a feeling of connection. And I think hope is the thing that is removed in trauma. That is why trauma is so deadly for our veterans. I've been writing with veterans for such a long time now that it's very familiar to me what their experience is. And with trauma, you're removed. That removal happens because it's impossible to articulate what happened. By definition, it's ineffable. And
there's shame. Shame is very silencing. Yeah.
The shame is always attached to trauma because you were unable to prevent the traumatic event.
Yeah.
Telling on the trauma and powering through the shame takes that toxic poison. Brene Brown writes about this better than anyone, and transforms it. You tell on it not to further shame yourself, but to release that toxin. And how does it get released? It gets released when another soldier comes up and says, "Oh man, me too, brother." Or, "Oh, sister, that happened to me." That "me too" lightens the shame, and transformation starts to occur. Music and song can reach places that language can't fully articulate. Melody contains lots of information. It can go all the way primal into a place that might have even preceded this life. So it is a deep form of communication. And if you marry an honest melody with truth, especially around trauma, you're in a very, very haunted and yet sacred forest. And that's the work I like doing. And you don't do that work without hope. You bring hope to it. And transformation comes from that vulnerability of reporting back from the scene of the event that misshaped you.
Great stuff, Mary. Thank you.
Great question. Hard question.
Mary and Sarah, this has been incredible. I could listen to the two of you talk all night long. It's really such a gift to hear both of you tonight. We do have some great questions from the audience, though, and other audience members, if you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Norman, who's joining us all the way from Northern Ireland this evening, says, Van Morrison sees himself as a working man who happens to write songs and sing them. Do you see yourself as a working woman rather than as an entertainer?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is Belfast, huh? I love Belfast. I've spent a lot of time in Northern Ireland, and it's a home away from home for me. My favorite co-writer that I work with all the time is a young lad from outside of Belfast, from Glenarm. His name is Ben Glover, and he lives here in Nashville now. He married an artist's manager here in Nashville, but he is such a delightful co-writer for me, and the Irish know no song, and they know truth, and they know struggle, and they know honesty when they hear it. And I love playing in Ireland, especially the North. So thanks for joining us. It's very, very late over there. You must be exhausted.
Thanks so much, Mary. There's a question here from Cal Workman. She says, I really wish that I had read the book before the event tonight, because she knows she had many, many more questions for you. She can't wait to read it. But she really appreciates your poetry set to song, and she really appreciates Mercy Now. Is there anything that you can share more about that song?
Yeah, I wrote a whole chapter around that song, and I talk about where it was born and how it was born, and I insert some of what Sarah was referencing, the early language of the song and the rewrites. That song has gone on to be recorded by a lot of other artists, folk singers, country singers, even Boy George. And the song surprised me. I wasn't even sure people would like it when I wrote it. It felt so personal and so connected to my story. But I did a few things intentionally when I wrote it, which was to intentionally not attach it to a particular moment in time. I think that was wise because now it moves through time with us. I mean, I wrote it when George Bush was president and building up to a war in Iraq that I was strongly opposed to. But I didn't tie the song to the specifics of that. And I'm glad I didn't, because it's come through all these administrations, and it takes on different meaning with different political events happening and different personal events. My father, my brother, that could be literal or that could be metaphorical. And I didn't realize that when I wrote it, because I was really writing about my father and my brother. And when I wrote it, my brother was in prison. But I didn't want to say that. It's not my place to tell that story in song without his permission, and I didn't have it. So I just said he's shackled to his fear and his doubt, which references the condition that got him into prison. And that made it more universal. So the universal nature of that song was intentional, but I didn't understand that it would connect with so many people over the years. I honestly think that's the song that I'm going to be most identified with unless I write something better or bigger. That's the one people attach to me the most, and that's the song that gets recorded by other artists the most that I've written.
Thank you. That's a great look behind the song. That's really fabulous. I got a question in direct messages asking, was it intimidating sitting down to write a full-length book?
Yes.
As opposed to a song?
Yes, it was horrible. Oh my God, I suffered. I sat here for 8 hours a day, weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. Oh, years went into this little book. I mean, it's a little book. It took 7 years. It went through so many rewrites, and I had to find a through line, and I had to figure out a structure, and I had to take stories where I got long-winded and shorten them. Just when I thought I was building up pages, someone who worked with me in the editing process said, "That's a great story. Now cut it in half." Like, no. So, you know what? It was hard, and it was really, really outside of my understanding of writing, but I grew and I learned, and I can't wait to do it again. I want to write another book. I love being an author, and to me, my house has thousands of books. Every room is stacked in books. I love books, and I love reading, and finding myself in friendships with authors and meeting other writers. It's just so exciting to me. It thrills me to no end to be friends with, like, Wally Lamb is my pal. You know, I've got writer friends now that I wasn't expecting that to happen. It's beautiful.
Thanks, Mary. There's a question here from Ben Broussard in New Orleans. He says, "I love the song Goddamn HIV. It's my favorite song to sing and play. I've read that section in your book about that song. Thank you so much for sharing it. Was it a difficult song to write? Were there a ton of rewrites, or was it writing itself since you experienced the AIDS epidemic through friends, the points of the song?"
Yeah. Hi, Bryn. That song was not hard to write. Once I found the voice, I just created a character who was a composite of the gay men that I knew who were dying of AIDS. It was my earliest song that I believe contains my writer's voice. It tackles a difficult subject in a genre that doesn't usually report from those subjects. and it humanizes a character that is often not heard from. That's what I do. That's my wheelhouse. Once I found the voice of Michael Joe Alexandri and his defiance and yet his fear, I was able to drop in scenes from my life. I had a friend who had pictures of all of his friends and himself when he was a younger man on his desk, and so I inserted that. I inserted hanging out at the gay bar in Baton Rouge without windows, and having it explained to me that we don't have windows because people don't want to be seen here, and furthermore, if we had windows, somebody might throw a bomb in it. It's too dangerous for gay clubs to have windows in that time in Baton Rouge. So I was able to throw in quite a bit of details from my life into this character that I created. And I found out later, when I was touring with John Prine, that Sam Stone is a composite of the soldiers John knew. And he called him Sam Stone because it rhymes with home. Sam Stone came home. It's a composite, it's fiction, but the point of great fiction is to bring us truth. And that's what my hope is that goddamn HIV does. It puts us into the truth and reality of a gay man with AIDS in the 80s.
So another question that came to me in my direct messages from Mark is, first of all, commenting that the book is amazing, and thank you for it, and sharing that some of his story around adoption is similar to yours. So thank you for that. But then saying, what would your first piece of advice be for a starting songwriter? And what kind of plans do you have for online and in-person workshops?
I'm teaching this weekend in Nashville. I've got 20 songwriters that have come in from around the country. And it kicks off on Wednesday night. I cook everybody jambalaya and jalapeno cornbread. And then Thursday morning we get to work, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I work with 20 songwriters at a time in person. I did quite a few workshops online in the pandemic. If we experience another shutdown, I'll do that again. But for now, we're working in person. And how do you get started with songwriting? Well, you get an instrument and you learn a couple of chords. And then you just start playing them and humming over them until you have a little bit of a melody. And then you try to drop some words in that make sense with the melody that you're coming up with. And try to find something that feels true. And try to find something that feels honest. And try to find something that's a little scary for you to sing about. That's when it starts to get good. Go towards the stuff you don't want people to know. And that's where songs are where we tell secrets. And the listeners don't know if it's fiction or if it's truly even you. And so working through the fear, I see one of the questions is, how do you work through the fear? I work through it because I know the listeners don't know if I'm making it up or not. I sing most of my songs in first person, but they're not all me.
This has been such a great night. I'm afraid we've only got time for one more question, and it's from Mel. She says, Mary, I was wondering about how you get yourself to tell your truth. You answered that by saying word by word in your song edit. But is there anything else you can say about that to a person who is an escape artist, meaning one who's very good at escaping their own feelings?
Well, the best way that I can describe it is by getting rid of the untruth. So write, and then I have a gut that works as a truthometer. And it goes off when I see something that's just not true. And I'll know by the feeling in my gut. Solar plexus has a lot of wisdom. In fact, they say solar plexus is as smart as the reasoning part of our brain. The gut knows things, like gut feeling. Like when somebody walks in a room, you don't know them, but you can tell that they're probably dangerous. That gut feeling, you can listen to it more and more. Turn it up. I call it the truthometer. Turn up the truthometer. That feeling of, this is pretty good, but I know there's something truer underneath it. You got to go find that truer thing. So you get to the truer thing by getting rid of the less true things. And that's just, it's an archaeological dig. The dinosaur's there, but you got to get to it, and you got to dig and dig and dig and dig. And be gentle. You know, the archaeologists go at it with a small paint by numbers paintbrush and a tiny little dustpan. You know, you don't want to go in there with a jackhammer. Gentle, persistent plodding. That's songwriting. Gentle, persistent plodding. It's an ordeal.
That is the perfect place to end on. It is an ordeal. Mary and Sarah, thank you both so much for sharing your words with us tonight. It's really been an incredible pleasure. Audience, thank you for being here with us. Those of you who ordered a ticket that includes a copy of the book, you should be getting that shortly. And everyone else, you can order the book at northshire.com. Thank you all so very, very much for being here, and we hope to see you another evening sometime soon.
Thanks, Sarah, Rachel. Thank you. Thank you all. And I hope to see you at Caffe Lena at some point soon in 22.
That sounds great. I'm going to look up your young 19-year-old friend as soon as we get off this call.
Let's do it. Yeah, Sam Williams. He's gonna shake things up around here, I think.
Sounds good.
Y'all take care.
Good night, everybody.